Welcome back to Not Boring CEs. I'm here with Amelia, not from arttherapyandreallife.com. And we're talking about art therapy. We're talking about creativity, and I'm really excited. Thank you for being here.
Me too. This is my favorite thing ever to talk about.
Yay. So, can we just start with why creativity is therapeutic?
Sure. I mean, for so many reasons, I think inherently most of us have a sense that creativity is good for mental health. It's a good way of taking care of ourselves. But
Mhm.
like in the context of therapy practice and mental health, I think that like creativity gives us this opportunity to expand our tool belt for understanding and processing our emotions,
Mhm.
right? Like for some of us, language can feel kind of limiting. Some of our experiences don't fit perfectly into language.
Right.
And like the analytical and cognitive sides of our brains are really powerful and really useful. And sometimes it's helpful to have something like color or shape or texture or metaphor to get into what we're experiencing when trying to nail it down in language feels kind of challenging.
Mhm. It's interesting too, because I think about how quickly creativity goes by the wayside for many of us when we're stressed out and when it can be our safety net. But we just don't always treat it that way. Um, do you think some people I know the answer to the question I was about to ask, so let me ask a better question. Um, why do you think some people are so much more attuned to creativity being helpful than others?
I mean, there's so many reasons for that. And I think what you said about creativity going by the wayside for a lot of us has to do with just how we were encouraged to be creative as really young people. I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
really common experience that maybe we had art classes through elementary school, but at a certain point, we internalize this messaging, either from teachers or caregivers or just the culture at large, that creativity is for people who possess a certain kind of skill or
Mm-hmm.
talent, or that it's not really worth our time unless it's going to become our career or unless we're
Right.
making in a way that fits that really narrow definition of like accurate Eurocentric Western marketable art, right? Like if we
Mm-hmm.
can't sell it or turn it into our jobs, then we shouldn't bother spending our time on it because there's other things that might be more important.
Right.
When I think in reality, it's such a human experience to want to take the things that are occurring inside of us and put them outside, right? To
Mm-hmm.
express what is happening in our bodies, in our brains, and bring them out into the world. And again, that's why creativity, I think, is so therapeutic because it gives us this opportunity to take something that is living inside of our bodies and actually get to handle it in a tactile way, actually get to manipulate it, maybe even change the story, right?
Hmm. I'm something you said just sparked something that actually ties into your other conversation in here about social media ethics. And I'm thinking about how those of us who did not feel good enough at art or whatever kind of creativity we were doing when we were younger, about how that might be where a lot of people are creating on social media and getting the message of why are you putting your personal stuff out here? Why are you crying on the internet? Like that kind of thing. But it is their way of trying to be creative and put something out there that is an external manifestation of what they feel inside. Um,
Yeah.
so something that you just said sparked that in me. And I was like, oh, this makes a lot more sense in a lot of ways, like in the absence of other kinds of art, or in just like an appreciation of what social media provides us when
Hmm.
there's not something tangible we can hold. But we do have to get it out somehow, right? Like we all have things we need to express in some way, and we don't always have easy avenues for that.
Well, and that brings up a really good point that like creativity doesn't just need to be like the traditional media we think of, right? It's not
Hmm.
just painting or drawing or writing perfectly polished poetry. It might be the way you assemble a playlist. It might be the way you create content or share vulnerably of yourself. We can hold a really wide definition of creativity. And I'm glad you mentioned social media because I think it taps into this, again, really human instinct to be seen and connect with other people in a vulnerable way, right? Art can do
Yeah.
that. And also the ways we show up online or the ways we show up in relationship are all just avenues for being seen and finding community and universality with other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about like my own experience. I can't remember if I've shared this with something we recorded or if we just talked about it, but like my own experience being raised by two artists. Like my mom's a sculptor and a painter. My father's a musician, but also could like draw anything in the world. And I literally like can barely make a stick figure look like a human. So I do not have the same kind of creativity and artistic talents that my parents have. And when I was younger, that felt like a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And there also, I thought that there was this expectation of me as the daughter of my parents to be naturally good at something. And there was a time when I was like, maybe that's in my head. And then I had an art teacher basically tell me, like, well, you didn't get your mom's genes, did you? So I think
Oh,
I know. So
what
I
an awful
just
thing to say to a
stopped.
kid.
I know. It was Miss Campbell, my middle school art teacher. Shout out to Miss Campbell. um, Hope you changed your ways. But just thinking about how, like for me, that shut down visual art. Like I was done with visual art. Luckily, I did a lot of performing arts, so I still had a different way to be creative. But we get these messages when we're young, we internalize them or we don't. And if you're 30 or you're 48 or you're, 25 and you're thinking about creativity as not for you, you've been missing out for a really long time on an outlet that could be really potentially life-saving for you in a lot of ways.
Hmm. And you know what, Allison, is so interesting is I'm not like a talented drawer either, right? Like
Mhm.
life drawing classes, like that with my ADHD and just like not having an interest in kind of belaboring something or finding accuracy. I think
Mhm.
had I had a different kind of set of circumstances in my upbringing, I would have also kind of met the end
Mhm.
of my art. I mean, one of the privileges of my childhood, I think, was painting in a class that was mostly focused on abstract and looking at kind of color and composition
Mhm.
and using that as kind of my own therapeutic process, even though it wasn't technically art therapy.
Mhm.
But like you say, so many of us miss out on this chance to tap into something creative because we're only ever shown the value of a finished product, not what the process can feel like.
Right. Good old capitalism.
Ah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so the process, can we talk a little bit more about process and why it's important therapeutically? Um,
mhm.
Far more important than the product in
And this
many
is, I think,
cases.
one of the big differences between like an art class
Hmm.
and an art therapy session is the focus really shifts
Hmm.
between making something that is finished, that you're happy with, that is good. I'm using heavy air quotes if anyone's just listening to that. And instead, we get to focus on, well, how does the process feel? Like what's happening internally before I begin? What is
Hmm.
it like to actually feel and touch the materials? What am I expressing? What decisions am I making? And like those are the kinds of parts of the process that an art therapist would help their client explore and unpack. And we might
Hmm.
not actually end up with anything at the end, right? Something that feels like you could put it up on the wall or frame it,
Hmm.
but there might be something in the process, usually something in the process that is interesting and that can be a really useful tool in exploring whatever emotional concerns or mental health issues that that person is bringing into session.
Hmm. Yeah. I think about the slowing down it requires too. Like it gets us out of our heads to some extent. It can be very meditative as well to be
Hmm.
working on something. I'm thinking about these little like side benefits. Having been an art therapy, a group art therapy client before, um, and how powerful it was for me to be like I had to be restricted for a little while to my non-dominant hand because my perfectionism. Like
Mm.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't be vulnerable because it was so bad.
Hmm.
And how using my non-dominant hand and not being allowed to use my dominant hand and it basically being required to look bad really saved me in a lot of ways.
And that's, I think, again, where art can be so powerful is we have very few opportunities in our daily lives, in our
Hmm.
jobs, in our relationships, where we have an arena to do something imperfect with low consequences,
Yes.
right? So to get to practice doing something imperfectly within like a safe therapeutic relationship where like it's okay that it doesn't look the way I anticipated, or it's not something that I would post online or that I would sell. Like having that experience for yourself is kind of a little stepping stone into, well, maybe there are other places in my life where it would be okay to be imperfect. And not only
Hmm.
that, then you have this artifact, this evidence that you can carry with you of like, yeah, that little moment of imperfection was safe. Maybe it was fun. Maybe it revealed something about me or it expressed something that I have trouble expressing in other places in my life.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm thinking about just like creative blocks in general, because there are those of us who tell ourselves we're not creative, and that's a big block. But then there are a lot of people who identify as creative, who find their own blocks along the way. What are some of those that people come across?
Well, I think this comes up, especially, it's really interesting working with clients who maybe do have art training or do something in a creative field. Maybe
Hmm.
they're writers or performers. And that's actually a really interesting experience when someone is in tune with one type of creativity to get to kind of step back and make in a way that doesn't have those same demands.
Hmm.
So I think perfectionism impacts us all, whether it's because we felt like, oh, I can't make art, I'm not a creative person, or
Hmm.
I make art in this one very specific way, and the stakes are really, really high. So
Hmm.
getting to create in a totally different way, maybe with like your non-dominant hand or materials that you wouldn't normally use, kind of opens back up the possibility of the creativity existing in some
Hmm.
different way.
Yeah. We're going to do an experiential activity, right?
We are. Yeah, I thought this would be kind of a cool way for listeners and watchers to just kind of see what an art therapist might do in session, but also, yeah, as an example of how like using kind of visual tools can be really revealing
Hmm.
of kind of what's going on for us outside of just conversation or language.
Yeah. So should they grab anything if they're not driving or not
Yeah, if
working
folks
out?
want to follow along, and to
Hmm.
be clear as well, this isn't us doing art therapy. I'm not going to analyze or kind of, we're not going to go deep on this one, but it will be an example of just what can happen without fancy materials, without a lot of time. If you have 3 pieces of just plain paper, you can go ahead and grab those right now. I know you've got some right in front of you.
I do.
So what I'll have you do is kind of grab your first piece of paper. We're going to make 3 sculptures and pretty quickly. And so there's lots of ways that paper can be manipulated. So maybe that is crunching it up. We're not trying to make anything specifically, but
Hmm.
just have 3 different experiences of how paper can look or feel. So maybe there's crumpling, maybe
You
you
know.
rip the next one or roll it. So let's just
Hmm.
spend, yeah, about a minute playing with paper and seeing what 3 ways that you can manipulate it. I'll do the same over here.
All right.
And for anyone following along, as you're going, like this is an opportunity to kind of slow down and experience something, paying extra attention to just what the paper feels like in your hands. Maybe the sounds it's making. I'm not sure that's being picked up by my microphone. Maybe the smell of it. And something I'll also say while we're creating is it's okay to make something you don't like. Like if you have an experience of going, oh, I don't like the way that turned out, that's just information. So whenever you're ready,
Hmm. I'm
let me
ready.
know. How was that?
It was fun. Yeah, I'm still playing with this one. I think there comes that point where you don't know when you're done or not. I usually jump early, I've noticed, as I'm like, okay, that's good. I don't want to mess it up. Um, and also noticing how each form or each action felt like me or not like me. That makes
Hmm.
sense?
Hmm. It totally makes sense. And actually, one of my favorite art therapy directives is to take two identical sets of materials and make one that you don't like and one that you do like, or one that
Uh-huh.
feels like you and one that doesn't feel like you. And
Mhm.
in an art therapy session, a therapist would help kind of process like what parts of that felt like you, how did you know? Like there's lots
Mhm.
in the processing of the artwork that can be revealing or really useful in a session.
Mhm. Yeah.
So in terms of what you've made, which
Mhm.
one feels most like you, whether that's your mood right now or you in general? And you don't necessarily need to know why,
Uh-huh.
but is there one that you gravitate towards?
This one feels more like me. It's just very symmetrical and orderly and like um like I'm a tissue folder. Like it's very it stands up on its own. There's probably a metaphor there. Um yeah, so it's just for people who are listening, I just folded the paper a bunch of times and it is like a 3D triangle kind of or half pyramid maybe. Uh yeah. So that one feels most
Hmm.
like me.
So if this was an art therapy session, there'd be some things to kind of pull on there. It stands
Mm-hmm.
up on its own, folded. I think to use the word orderly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, those
Yes.
could be things that we draw on.
Uh-huh.
But then the other thing that could happen in a session is we could ask, okay, well, what does that need, this
Mm-hmm.
sculpture? And there could be a whole other creative process around, does it need to change? Does it need color? Does it need to be protected? Like maybe a whole session involves building a box or an environment that it would want to live in.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that could happen in an art therapy session is we could repeat that at the very end. That could be a check-in to kind of gauge how we're
Mm-hmm.
entering. And then we could do it again and take a look at, okay, what's different between the beginning and the end of session as a way of giving some language or some visual metaphors to the internal shift that's happened in our time together.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Should I show the other ones too?
Yeah, yeah.
So this one feels the least like me. It's just like it's an unintentionally crumpled paper. Like I realized I was like, and I was also really mashing it, trying to get it like a flat crumple. Um, which just feels messy. But that's okay. A little mess is all right. And then I have this one that is just a bunch of semi-symmetrical tears um, that are almost wave-like. So those are mine.
I actually need some similar ones. I have a crumple that didn't feel like me. I had a crumple that was turning into a
Mm.
kind of rounded edge, and then some tears as well.
Uh-huh.
And in an art therapy session, the ways that we might process, one would be talking about how the process felt. Like, what did you
Mhm.
start with? What actually happened while you were making? We could go into, okay, well, what do you see? Right? The crumple, you could describe it in a phenomenological way, and that would give us a lot to jump off from. And then there's the metaphorical level. Like, does this remind you of something? Does it look like something, or is there a kind of a personal symbol that's coming from any of these pieces? Like, there's lots of avenues that an art therapist might go in helping the client look for the metaphors or the meaning in their process.
Mhm. Awesome. Yeah. So we've had an example of what an art therapist might explore. Can we talk some about like what is art therapy?
Hmm. And yeah, so that example that we just did perhaps isn't something that another clinician would do if art therapy isn't their specialty.
Hmm.
But art therapy specifically is a modality of psychotherapy that combines expressive art making and counseling skills to help clients process emotions, regulate, kind of meet their treatment goals. And it's more than just kind of using art as a way of like regulating, or it's more than just what's the word I'm looking for? recreation. I think a big misconception of art
Mm.
therapy is, oh, it's like the groups that happen in retirement homes, or
Mm.
it's for fun, it's for relaxation. And it absolutely can be. That can be a piece of it. But what art therapists specifically do is have training around the actual processing and expressing of emotions within the visual materials.
Mhm. So, can we talk some about an art therapist versus art therapy, protected terms, those kinds of things?
Yeah, and this is something really important. I don't know if you've seen on like Psychology Today, you can just click the art therapy box
Mm.
without verifying any kind of specific training. And just like psychotherapist or psychiatrist or counselor, depending on the state and the regulations, art therapy in Canada and the United States is a protected term. So art therapists need to have a master's level training specifically in art therapy. And
Mhm.
just like other therapeutic modalities, that involves a certain number of practicum hours, supervision, specifically within this one modality. So
Mm.
this is all to say that unless you've got the specific training as an art therapist and belong to an art therapy regulatory body, you can't use the term art therapy. Now, that's not to gatekeep creativity. There's lots of ways that art and expressing ourselves can be therapeutic personally, and that other kinds of practitioners can bring creativity in.
Mhm.
But I think the line exists when we're moving from, say, art as a calming or regulating technique or a mindfulness exercise into the act of actually using an art process to explore an emotion or to be treatment.
Mhm. So I think about like people like me who are not trained art therapists. What would be a safe way to bring creativity or art into session? And how would we know which clients that would be most beneficial for?
Mhm.
Big questions.
It's big. And I think it comes back to this, like, we don't know what we don't know. So
Mhm.
it can feel like, oh yeah, it would be okay for me to like say bring in some materials and have a client like represent a memory from childhood.
Mhm.
And like there's some big risks involved. And that's because especially that like memory and trauma lives in the visual side of the brain. So it's really possible to be activated suddenly in a
Mhm.
creative process in a way that we might not be in conversation.
Mhm.
So yeah, that caution is just, again, we don't know what we don't know. But going back to what could be safe, I think when it comes to like teaching coping skills, something that is mindful, something that is regulating. So maybe you have coloring books in your
Mhm.
office, or maybe like drawing a breath spiral. That's one activity I really like where a client would kind of focus on their breath while drawing, right? It gives them something to focus on, something tactile in the
Mhm.
here and now, because sometimes just breathing or focusing on the body is too overwhelming
Mhm.
or hard to really visualize. So I think, yeah, mindful techniques as coping skills can be appropriate. I mean, the other thing, and again, this will go down to individual discretion, but I know for lots of clients, like making eye contact during session while they're having a conversation can be pretty overwhelming. So
Mhm.
having like something as a fidget or Play-Doh, something to kind of do with your hands while you're talking can kind
Mhm.
of be a third place to put the focus. And I found sometimes that really helps with vulnerability or helps a client feel comfortable in discussions where maybe just the sitting and the eye contact feels really, really direct.
Mhm.
But again, like the place to be cautious is when it comes to the processing. So what like a talk therapist wouldn't do is ask, what do you see in that, or what's the metaphor, or start to kind of pull out um, meaning in the piece. But
Mhm.
again, when it comes to something that is helping the client to kind of relax, regulate, I think that can be safe depending
Mhm.
on the specific context you're working in.
Yeah, I'm thinking about working with kids too, and how often art supplies are used in working with kids, and how they don't always have the language.
Hmm.
And so, like, does the line shift for them? Like, is there more kind of delving into the work itself that's safe with kids if you're not a trained art therapist, or is it still hold the line back where you would with an adult?
That's a good question. And I don't work with kids. My practice is all working with adults. My
Mhm.
practicum did include working with kids, but like a play therapist isn't technically an art therapist if they have that different training, but would likely
Right.
use things like a sand tray or art materials.
Hmm.
Um, so I think it depends on your modality and your scope of practice.
Hmm.
If it's something that you haven't been trained in or haven't kind of experienced or have supervision around, using caution. But with kids, like play can look like so many things,
Hmm.
right? You might know better than I. Like, have you ever used art materials or had things like that out in kid
Yeah.
sessions?
I mean, back in the day when I worked with kids, we always had art supplies in the rooms. This was back in agency work. But I would just be like, hey, you want to draw and color with me? Kind of like while we talked about things. And sometimes at the end, I'd be like, what you got? And they'd be like, oh, I drew my family. And I'd be like, I don't know all the rules for interpreting this, so I'm not going to. I'm just gonna be like, oh, I drew my dog. So I think I was always afraid of stepping in it because that's the way I am. Like I'm gonna veer towards overly cautious and respecting a limit more than I'm gonna be like, oops. So I probably was a lot more safe, but I know that, I know a lot of kid therapists who use a lot of art and maybe diving into it more. So I'm kind of asking on their benefit on their behalf because I am not entirely sure. So,
I think you have it exactly right, though, Allison. The not interpreting piece is so
mhm,
important. And we might assume that an art therapist interprets or, sees a certain color or a certain symbol and thinks, oh, okay, that's what's going on there.
mhm,
And in a person-centered art therapy approach, we actually don't make interpretations. Any
mm,
meaning comes from the artists themselves. So I wouldn't even ask a client like, "Oh, what's going on with the crying woman in the piece?" Because I'm
mhm,
assuming it's a woman, they're crying. But the question you asked,
right.
like, "What do you got? What's going on here?" Being
Mhm,
curious about what's happening, I think means that the client gets to tell you about what they've experienced. And that
mhm,
curiosity can look like, how was that process for you? Like, what changed for you before and after? Or moving into the relational, how is it to share that with me?
mhm. I love that. Okay, cool. And I'm thinking about like a CE I took years and years ago that first really introduced me to therapy as a therapist. When I was younger, I'd been a client. But it felt so like this means this and this means this. So I'm really interested in hearing you be like, like let's let them interpret. Like if somebody's feet aren't touching the ground in the picture, it doesn't necessarily mean X, Y, or Z. Or like there were
Mhm.
all these rules that I was like, oh, this is intense. I had no idea. Um,
Right. And that's
and
that's
like,
a like a psychodynamic therapeutic approach. Art therapy's roots are in
right.
that approach of the therapist getting to interpret or having some kind of knowledge or insight.
Uh-huh.
But it comes back to like, how do we want to hold hierarchies of power in session, right? If
Mm,
I'm the expert of a client's art, that's really disempowering,
yeah.
right? Like, I think it's so much more powerful when someone gets to tell you about what something means for them than if they look to you, okay, I've made something, what does it mean? They'll be much more able to kind of step into their own creative practice and
Hmm.
decide, okay, this is what feels good for me. This is how I express myself. This is, yeah, my own dictionary of meaning, as opposed to needing to turn to a quote expert about
Hmm.
what is true for them, which I mean is the same in talk therapy, right? We want to equip
Right.
people to go out into the world to use the tools for themselves, not rely on another person to tell them what their life, what their emotions mean.
Hmm. I'm thinking about like how you would handle it if people are like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what it means. I just like the color. Like, how do you, as an art therapist, how do you respond to that and
That's
learn
kind of,
more?
yeah, I kind of love it when people say, I don't know. Like there's a lot to open up in that. I mean, one
Hmm.
place is, what's it like not to know? Right? What's it like to be with this thing that doesn't immediately tell you what it's about or to kind of
Hmm.
be uncertain, right? And
Yeah.
from there could be another process of like, how might we get to know? Maybe there's writing dialogue between yourself and the piece. Or maybe it's coming back to, well, what do you know about this piece? And like oftentimes what I'll do in sessions is kind of slow way down. So we're not jumping into the metaphor or what it means, but really literally, what do you see? Like a question I'd love to ask is, okay, pretend I can't see the work or that I don't have the use of my eyes. How would you describe what's in front of me in like the most basic terms? So
Mm.
with something like this, it could be it's a white rectangle that has been crumpled dozens or hundreds of times. Like there's so many ways that you can describe something visually. And in that description, the way the client chooses their words and chooses what they're going to focus on, like from there, there's always
Mm.
something that can lead into a therapeutic process.
Huh. Are there like, is there anything with the materials that people need to be aware of and thoughtful about?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, again, this is something around like if you don't know, you don't know. Like
Mm-hmm.
the way art therapists might choose materials or collaborate with their client on choosing materials has so much to do with their history or their comfort level or their sensory needs. I think a good example is like, say I'm working with a new client, I know they have a trauma history. I probably wouldn't choose a really uncontained material. Like I wouldn't bring out watercolors. I wouldn't say, okay, let's do finger painting on a giant piece. What I might do instead, and as I get to know them, this could be more and more refined, but it might be something like I'm actually going to tape down the borders of a piece onto the table so it's really sturdy. And so there's a visual border, like a metaphor for
Mm.
containment for the work to happen within. And I might offer kind of predictable materials that don't smudge. Um, so that could be one way of working with material. So we're always thinking about not just like what is the comfort level and preference, but what kind of are the metaphors within the material and appropriate to what the client is experiencing. And for
Mm-hmm.
some people, like actually using like visual media, approaching a blank canvas is way too overwhelming, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the blank canvas anxiety is really real. So maybe digital tools are a safer stepping stone. Maybe we'll use something like a drawing app where they can press undo. Maybe we'll even use like an AI art tool like Midjourney so they can type in a prompt and see what comes up. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually working towards tolerating like the imperfection and the anxiety of the blank open canvas. But there's a lot of ways that we can choose a different kind of material with a different kind of metaphor to help them process whatever it is they're working on.
Mm-hmm. It hadn't even occurred to me the use of like digital media in art therapy. Like I hadn't gotten there in my head yet. That's
Hmm.
really fascinating. Um, does that ever get like stratified by generation or by age? Have you noticed? Like,
Hmm.
or is it typically more clinical presentation?
That's a good question. I mean, I think with all materials, there's a process of helping the client feel comfortable. Different things are uncomfortable to different people.
Mm-hmm.
And again, what an art therapist would do is like really deliberately help somebody feel comfortable. So maybe if we're working with digital tools, part of that is kind of slowing down and like, okay, this is how you would open this app. This is how you would save your artwork in a way that's secure. So kind of doing some hand holding to make it comfortable to use those materials.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and a sense of like mastery that comes from approaching something that maybe you weren't comfortable with before can then
Mm-hmm.
also bleed out into their lives. So I'm not sure if there's a generational divide between digital and non-digital tools. I think younger generations that kind of use technology more often might kind of immediately understand how to use like an
Mm-hmm.
app or something like that. Whereas someone who has
Yeah.
less experience using computers or phones might need a little bit more support getting there. But I think it can be valuable for people in both ways.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's lots of debate in the art therapy community about the usefulness of digital versus traditional media. I
Mm-hmm.
think what we can't do on a computer screen is actually have the tactile experience
Right,
of making
right.
something. Like the sensory feedback is a really important part of art therapy. So that's what we miss when we're using Canva or a drawing tool or something like that. But
Mhm.
different situations, different materials.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about it more from like the younger generation who naturally spends more time on screens than an older generation may, and how it might feel easier for them, but it might be more beneficial to be more tactile and in their real world. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, it's
No, and I
interesting.
agree with you. I know an art therapist who, was feeling challenged working with youth to get them to use materials, but they were amazed at like an AI image generator and what could happen there. And that sparked
Mhm,
something that could then be translated to something visual. And I mean, that's just another opportunity for exploration with our clients. Like maybe
mhm.
you make something digitally and make something in a tactile way. Like, how was that different? Like, did you notice something change for you working digitally versus working in a tactile way? Like
Right.
an example for myself is I feel really different when I'm like typing a journal entry or a poem versus when
Mhm.
I'm actually writing it with my hand.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I get that as well. I'm the same, like I'm old school with so many things. That's why I have
mhm.
paper so easily accessible, because writing things helps get things in my brain a little bit differently than typing it. Um, yeah. So being mindful about the art materials you're using is a big part of art therapy. Um, I'm thinking, so I talk to therapists constantly. It's like what I do and how I feel like the burnout level amongst therapists has, like, it increased so sharply in 2020, and I don't feel like it's gone down.
Mhm.
I feel like it's either plateaued or gone up. I'm curious how therapists could be using um, creativity or art or anything to help with burnout, because I know like that's something that got me out of burnout in 2021. I was able to pop out of it by like going into my creative self and
Mhm.
maintaining that since then. So I know that there's great utility and creativity to get us out of our clinical brains constantly. So how do you recommend therapists do that?
Well, I mean, maybe we can use you as an example if you're comfortable talking
Yeah,
about it. Like,
totally,
what were you
totally.
doing creatively and what shifted for you?
Yeah, well, I'd gotten to a place where I was like, all I've done for years now, it feels like, is obligations. It is like work obligations, family obligations, bill obligations, like all the things that just needed to get done. And I wasn't having fun. I was getting
Mhm.
together with friends before COVID, and then COVID struck, and I didn't have that anymore. And as a hardcore extrovert, that did not suit me well. So in 2021, I went through this exploration of what used to be fun for me back in the day.
Mhm.
Like back in high school, what was fun? Because I couldn't, what was fun in college was going out drinking with my friends, which was not really suiting my lifestyle now. Um, and I went to a performing arts high school. I did, improv a lot. I sang. I did a lot of things that were performing arts related. So I started like a beginner's improv class.
So fun.
And we were all masked. I mean, for like a year of working together in these classes, like we were all just masked. And which you would think would be a real detriment to acting, but we made it work. And it was fun. I was playing. Like I hadn't played in so long. And it just felt silly and like this thing I did just for myself. And it didn't matter how tired I was at the end of a workday. By the time I got to improv that night, I was like bouncy. I was ready.
Mhm.
And so just being able to do that. And it wasn't, memorizing lines or, there was nothing obligatory about it. And I didn't have to prepare for it, which is like the opposite of most of my life. I could just show up and do. And if I bombed, it didn't matter at all. It did not matter. And that was really freeing. So,
Mm.
yeah. And I've been doing improv since. Um, and it's a really big part of my joy every week.
But what changed like in your work or like kind of the obligation side of your life when you had that outlet?
Yeah, I mean, there was reprieve, really. Like I just had something that was just for me. I tend to be somebody who will hyper fixate on things that really don't need that much attention. And so I found that when I had some playtime in my life that was just for me and was just for joy, I realized how much stuff I was worried about or taking care of didn't really matter, and I could prioritize better.
Mm.
Um, and I was a much more happy, fun mom, a much happier, more fun partner. Um, Once we were seeing friends again regularly, like I was a more joyful version of myself than had gone into the pandemic. And so I feel like it just like brought me back to myself ultimately.
Oh, brought me back to myself.
Yeah.
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 Like the phrase that you've used that I think probably everybody listening can relate to is the having something just for me, and
Yes.
how crucial that is, especially when we care for a living, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if our job is emotional labor,
Yeah.
and if we're also perhaps socialized female and in lots of other caretaking roles, to
Mm-hmm.
protect some time to do something that is selfish in the best possible use of that word is
Mm-hmm.
really, really important and special. And especially given also the fact that we experienced a collective trauma moving through
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic. We experienced collective and vicarious trauma watching the news cycle. We experienced that as
Yeah.
well,
Mm-hmm.
hearing and supporting people in challenging situations. So play, I think, isn't something to be taken lightly. I've
Mm-hmm.
heard play described as the opposite of trauma. So
Mm-hmm.
giving ourselves again opportunities to do something where, the final memorized performance isn't the goal, or the perfect painting isn't the goal. It's not frivolous, it's not a cute little hobby. It's life-saving. It really is. So I think the first answer to your question is finding ways to protect time to give
Yeah.
some of that back to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And if carving that out feels hard, like I think outsourcing some of that accountability is a really useful way. Maybe that is, okay, I'm finally going to sign myself up for the pottery class, and my partner is taking care of the kids that night. Like putting
Mm-hmm.
something on the schedule and having community around it is one way to protect that. Like I know
Mm-hmm.
for myself, art often falls to the bottom of my to-do list. But when there's something, maybe I've paid for it or I bought the
Mm-hmm.
materials, it's in the calendar, I have to go somewhere, like then it's protected from all the other responsibilities and things that life is asking
Yeah.
of us. So that's, I think, one is finding those creative outlets for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that might even be an arts-based supervision group. Like those
Mm.
exist. Art therapists, supervisors are really incredible people who use different creative techniques in the process of supervision or group supervision. Or maybe it's even a peer support group of therapists who get together on Zoom and crochet while they're having conversation or while they're just
Mm-hmm.
connecting, once a month or something like that. So those are a couple of ideas. I'm just gonna have a sip of water.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other things that are really useful for preventing burnout, um, is how we think about what we take home with us. Like that's, I think, for me, when I've been on the brink of burnout, it's because the conversations that are happening in sessions are heavy, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it when I get home from work. I'm thinking about it when I wake up in the morning. So post-session art is a really important part of my practice, and I know it is for lots of therapists and creative people, where if we've heard something or something's kind of sticking with us from the work we've done with our clients that day, maybe taking even 5 or 10 minutes to represent it visually
Mm-hmm.
or to write about it, and then to actually dispose of it or close it up, to give ourselves the metaphor of closure. So sometimes for me, that is kind of drawing out something abstract or something that kind of holds the essence of what I've done in my workday, folding it, recycling it, crumpling it, maybe burning it in the fireplace afterwards, just so that I have like the physical experience of, okay, it's coming out of my body, it's being represented, I have some control, and now I'm going to put it away really mindfully. I think that's a useful tool just for kind of moving through the stress cycle.
Yeah, that mindfully putting it away piece is really important. I'm realizing, like, as you say that, thinking about like when I've left kind of creative things open, like just shoved them in a desk drawer or something like that instead of kind of reverently and intentionally closing it up. Uh,
Yeah.
like it helps keep it in its container.
And in its container is like the perfect way of phrasing that. And something that might also not be obvious to folks who aren't art therapists is like what happens to the artwork after it's quote finished is a part of the process,
Hmm.
right? Does this need the reverence of a frame or going up on the fridge? Does this need to be ripped up or disposed of? Does it need to be tucked somewhere where nobody else can find it? Like what happens kind of after the process is paused or closed, whether it's to keep it safe so we can come back to it when we're ready or when we have time, or whether it's giving ourselves some kind of metaphorical closure. Like that's a really important part of the creative process too.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about like the compassion fatigue we feel, and I guess I'm thinking more of writing than like visual art, and how that works with HIPAA.
Uh-huh.
um, yeah, like are there ways that you would guide therapists who maybe feel more connected to writing than a visual
Mhm.
art to be able to process those emotions in a way that doesn't have any PHI in it, I guess,
Yeah.
to make it super clinical.
No, but I'm glad you mentioned that because like client art is personal health information, right?
Right,
Like
right. That's
therapists
true.
can't store their clients' artwork anywhere that isn't secure online or, in a physical office. It needs to be locked away. And the
Mhm.
same goes for post-session art, right? We can't have identifying details. So, I mean, one practice that that I really love is say I'm doing some post-session writing. I'm writing about what I experienced, how it impacted me. Maybe there's an exploration of transference or whatever it is. What I might do is something called a distillation poem, where I kind of, okay, go through my writing. I'm going to circle the words or the phrases that stand out to me and actually cut them out and then rearrange just those words into a poem for
Mm.
myself to find new
Mhm.
meaning. And then maybe shred and like properly and safely dispose of anything that could be identifying.
Mhm.
But that's one way of kind of taking like the client material, kind of processing it for ourselves in a way that we might need to without, yeah, kind of stepping over those lines. And another important consideration is we probably don't post our post-session art or anything that relates to, our experiences of what a client has been through as well. Like that extends in the same way that we don't talk about what happens in our client sessions with others or on social media. We probably don't kind of share our personal process around it. Like, of
Mhm.
course, there's gray areas, but I think holding our clients with that reverence and really honoring their experience means holding kind of our own processing of that in a similar way as well.
Mhm. How do you handle the artwork? Do you have clients take it home with them? Do you take photographs so you can upload it to your HR and then delete the photo? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, so it's different depending on what context you're working in.
Mhm.
I only work online. So what would happen during a session is I'm using a video platform, first of all, that is HIPAA or PHIPAA compliant, right?
Mhm.
When a client texts a photo, so we'll be working in session and
Mhm.
they'll take a photo on their phone. They'll send it to me through an encrypted messaging service
Mhm.
because something like, let's say like iMessage isn't encrypted. And if the
Mhm.
image is going to be stored on another server, that's no longer private.
Right.
So then what I will do is upload it to my note system. And so my
Mhm.
notes are again in an encrypted software and that's where they stay. And
Mhm.
so making sure that there's no photos of client art in email, there's no photos on my desktop, that my desktop isn't automatically uploading things to cloud. Like that's
Mhm.
the online way of protecting client health information. But if it's in person, then we would store things the way we would store our clinical notes. So a locked
Mhm.
file cabinet, or maybe there's a closet or a room where client work gets locked and stored away.
Mhm.
And if it's being sent home, then again, there's that conversation about what's going to happen with the art. Of course, the client gets to choose, whether they're keeping it, whether they're ritually destroying it or letting it be transformed. Um, but one really important consideration with working with kids is having conversations with the parents about what
Mm.
happens to the artwork post session,
Mhm.
right? It needs to be treated in a different way than stuff that's coming home from kindergarten art class.
Yes, yes, which finds its way sneakily into the recycle.
Mhm.
In my household anyway, but not the work that's done in therapy. Um, yeah. So you'd mentioned mindfulness earlier. We've talked about art materials, and I'm just thinking about that experience, the tactile experience of different art materials. I'm thinking about like how different a oh, what do they call it? Like just like a fine point Sharpie feels versus a crayon versus markers versus charcoals. How do you help people stay slow and present with each of those materials? Do you ever encourage them to try something they don't automatically feel drawn to? Like, how do you do that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if it's in person, then I would set up a studio with a variety of things, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I only work online these days, but if I ever get back to a studio, then it would be a room with tons of options
Mhm.
available. So the first thing might be inviting, like, okay, what are you gravitating towards? Or maybe I have some materials set out in the space that we're working in. So if a client wouldn't naturally gravitate towards something, there might be an invitation to try something else. And to help somebody stay slow, maybe there is like, oh, like maybe noticing how it sounds or how it feels, just like we did in this activity, to not go immediately into this is what I'm producing on the page visually in front of me, but all the senses that are getting activated when we're working with a material, the touch, the smell, the sight of something. So yeah, inviting in that sensory input is one way.
Mhm. I'm thinking about how grounding that could be just on their own as well. If they're having a
Mhm.
rough day, it doesn't take much to grab a piece of paper, like if you have some space to just feel and just be with that piece of paper and whatever materials you have in your desk drawer. Like it could be therapeutic for a client or for a therapist to just be with that for a little while before going back to business as usual work. Um, yeah. What else about art therapy do you feel is really important for us to understand as beginners to like even just knowing about it?
Hmm. I mean, I think some of the misconceptions that art therapists come up against, like we mentioned before, is that it's just recreation or it's,
Mhm.
just about the play or that it's kind of a light discipline.
Mhm.
Um, I think art therapists are pretty sensitive to not being taken seriously compared
Mm.
to perhaps other modalities when we are also psychotherapists.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think it's important for folks to know that there's a huge body of research around this kind of modality and that it's really valuable for folks to have a nonverbal way of expressing themselves, whether that is in the context of art psychotherapy or, like you said, the way it feels to go home and pull out a paint by numbers or pull out something where you have that tactile experience
Mhm.
um, as a way of caring for yourselves. So yeah, essentially, I guess the point I want to make is that there's so much focus in like the self-help and mental health world on doing like analytical work of healing
Mhm.
when it's also really, really valuable to do like the embodied, creative, tactile, expressive work of playing, of expressing ourselves in that other way. And I mean, I'm just really excited about the work that's being done by the art therapy associations in Canada and the States, the growing research that's coming out. And I think, yeah, the growing popularity of people starting to express themselves as adults in ways that don't need to be perfect and polished. I think that's evident in like the rising popularity of like coloring books or,
Mhm.
you know, the people we see online showing different kinds of creative techniques and like the energy that started in the early pandemic of people taking up sourdough baking or whatever new hobby. Like I think
Uh-huh.
there was something powerful in that points to exactly why creativity is a really important tool for all of us
Mhm.
to make space for.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about how, because we have access to so many people doing creative things online, right? Like we've got Pinterest, we've got wonderful accounts on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. We can follow all these people being creative and it can be really inspirational. And it's good to actually do the things too, not just watch. It's nice to
Hmm.
watch. I enjoy a good like cookie decorating video. Um, and I signed up for a class to learn how to do cookie decorating,
Oh my
just
gosh,
to like play
awesome.
with it. I know it's
Yeah.
so satisfying. Gosh. Um, but just, I know for me, I'm really careful of what I consume versus what I do. That's
Hmm.
something I've just learned over the years with social media is like, if I'm really drawn to watching something, maybe I'd be drawn to doing it too. And let's bring more things into my real life and not just what I'm watching other people do with their lives online. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm I'm excited about what feels like an overlap with the rise of somatic therapies and arts and expressive therapies. I feel like they really do have a lot of really wonderful overlap that's not rooted in what do you think? And I mean, I'm more of an ACT therapist than anything, so I'm definitely in the talk therapy cognitive world, the top down world, but I really get excited about the bottom up and the creative expression that isn't so readily like tip of tongue, like describing what's going on with you, you know?
And that's, I mean, maybe this is something people also don't know about art therapy is it involves both, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes we'll have sessions where we're mostly talking, you
Hmm.
know, language is also a creative tool. So sometimes framing like a session where we're mostly in conversation as like a creative act can help us
Hmm.
play with language in a more expansive way. But
Hmm.
there's, I think, again, this interplay between top down, like what do I see? What do I think? Um, what meaning am I making of this? Along with the bottom up approach of what happens if I spend an hour with a crayon in both hands on a massive piece of paper, right? Like we get to
Hmm.
use both sides of our brain and touch in with a bunch of different modalities to figure out what circumstance would be most appropriate for what approach. And that's what I love about art therapy is like the tool belt we have access to as art
Hmm.
therapists is every material and more, right? Like it gets to be
Yeah.
so tailored to the client experience.
Yeah. That's really exciting because it does allow you to play with what's really helping your client best, to like really
Hmm.
pay attention to what's landing for them and what's not, which even the stuff that's not is great, juicy information, right? Like there's always good stuff in there too.
And something else that art therapists do that I think is unique from talk therapy is we'll often hold art reviews. So maybe after 10 sessions or a number of months, when there's a natural pause point, an
Hmm.
art therapist might make a slideshow of all the pieces
Mm.
that their client has made up until that point and use that as like a visual way of, okay, here's where we started. Here's where we are now. Like, what do you notice changing in these
Hmm.
pieces? What do you remember about these pieces? Like something I really love about this discipline is that we have the visual aids to remember what's happened in each session. And the client has this artifact of what they've done and experienced to look back on. So like the
Hmm.
potential for reflection is really, really unique in art
Yes,
therapy.
that would be, and it's compelling, like
Hmm.
it's compelling for the client in a way that me being like, well, I was looking at my notes and, where you've come since July, like this is impressive, like it's very different and it's their interpretation as opposed to like
Hmm.
my interpretation through my notes, presenting it to them. I love that. Yeah, I want an art review. Awesome. Well, Amelia, thank you so much. I appreciate you talking with us. I hope that this sparks a lot of people who are wanting to look more into the discipline and consider it. And whether it's as a client or as a clinician, because having been on the client side of it, I can say art therapy is very powerful stuff. And it definitely was a very integral part to my own healing years ago. So Yay.
Yeah, that makes me so happy to hear. And for folks who are interested in the field, I'll say that there are some programs where you won't need to do a whole other master's degree. There's a couple of schools in the United States that do, yeah, programs made for people who have existing training. So know that that's an option if you feel really drawn towards art therapy. There's also different kinds of programs for folks who want to bring in more creative tools in that kind of mindful coping skills kind of way, but not actually stepping fully into art therapy.
Yes. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah, of course. The last thing I'll say as well is if folks are interested in becoming an art therapist, I've got a webinar available about the entire education and credentials process that was made with
Oh,
Elise Suriani, who is an amazing art therapist based in Chicago. So if you'd like kind of the step-by-step plan to learn about what it takes to get into the field and become accredited, there's a discount for everyone who is a part of non-boring CEs. So we'll
awesome.
send some links to that as well.
Wonderful. We'll make sure that those are easily accessible and available. Yeah, I appreciate it so much, Amelia. Thank you.
Yeah, I always love our conversations. This has been
Me
great.
too.